warm welcome to all the friends and participants of this course. Um, a course on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and the agenda for nation building, which is a virtual course organized by the International Institute of Anthropological Applications, which is created by Anthropological Association for Humankind. So this course on Ambedkar and the agenda for nation building is offered by Professor P.D.Satyapal Kumar sir, a senior professor from the Department of Anthropology, Andhra University, Visakhapatnam. So we are very proud to have him as a resource person for on this much needed course, the nation building. So I request Professor Satyapal Kumar sir to deliver his lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Sagarthaya, and good evening, friends. Yeah, this is our 10th talk in this course on Ambedkar and agenda for nation building. And we have fixed our topic for today as Constitution as an agenda for reconstruction of society. So the topic itself, in fact, is quite clear. Generally, we see constitutions are drafted as handbooks of governance, political governance, as guiding forces for political governance of any kind of a country. But today we are talking about the Constitution of India, particularly as an agenda for social reconstruction. Especially, obviously, we say that on the democratic lines. So, couching this to the anthropology, post-coloniality actually has been studied by many streams in social sciences, law, constitutional law especially, political scientists and all. So there are many studies, in fact, now how post-coloniality is constructed and how several colonized, countries, when they attained freedom, they try to form a kind of an administrative documents for their self-governance. So, but when it comes to anthropology, yes, there are few studies on post-coloniality, and studies which took up by Gayatri Spey of Chakrabarti, and then Sarkar, especially from India, and then Bhabha, Homi Bhabha, and people like us, especially in Africa, we have Mbembe. All these people, they try to study from the anthropological lens regarding the post-colonial constitutions. So they also, in fact, try to bring into their study how different nation states, they try to cope up with the self-governance, and sometimes, in fact, led to oppressive necropolitics in some nation states, which made things very worse. And studies by Bhabha especially, they talked about colonial rule is being projected, in fact, now as an agonizing psychodrama, and the play of power within the colonial discourse has been analyzed. And in the post-colonial nation states, how the liberation or the so-called freedom, in fact, now has been instituted and which had been put to operation. So several studies have been there, but when we come to particularly to anthropology, we find very few works. I have at least, in fact, now found out a book which was published in 2004, that is a Constitutional Ethnography, an introduction by Kimlane Chapelet. And another interesting book which we find is the Oxford Handbook of Law and Anthropology by none other than Mark Goodall, who is quite well known in urban anthropology and also legal anthropology. And we also can see some of the important, say, introspections into the legal anthropology and then this constitutional ethnography with regard to law, anthropology, and constitution of the social. So it's by Pottage, Ellen. And another important work which I find it quite interesting to us is the work by say Sylvain Bailey. Her studies on caste, society, and politics in India from 18th century to the modern age. Apart from all, there is one very pertinent say publication that came out from B.R. Ambedkar, academic fellow at Columbia Law School, and then of course who moved on to complete his PhD from Harvard University. That is by Madhav Khosla. Madhav Khosla's title of the book is India's Founding Movement, the Constitution of a Most Surprising Democracy. The title itself is very interesting, and then the kind of observations made by Madhav Khosla, to me, like in a sense, I found that they're very interesting and distinct. Of course, in the list, I can also add one more important book by Christopher Jafferlet and Narendra Kumar from Delhi University. Both of them have dug into the Constituent Assembly debates uh, which took place on Constituent Assembly. In fact, no, like the Constitution of India has been drafted in these particular debates in the during this time. So for 2 years and 11 months. So what has exactly happened in the making of the Constitution? So we come to know many details and uh, different kinds of interpretations as to what exactly say is there in the mind of the people who are there to sit for drafting a constitution. So having said all this, friends, the Constitution of India has been particularly eulogized as not just as a political document, but the Constitution of India has also been a social document, more pertinently. So this has been the unique feature of the Constitution of India. Across several constitutions in the world, whether they are post-colonial or even, in fact, no, even during the colonial times or even different constitutions, we know they simply become the kind of a what you call guidebooks for administration. Deviating from that particular practice, the Constitution of India has been hailed as a unique document of social revolution from none other than a very authority on the Constitution of India. Uh, Sir, it was Granville Aston, Professor Granville Aston, who was an American, constitutional expert on India, stayed for India for a long time, and produced two important books: Indian Constitution, the Cornerstone of a Nation. That was the title. That was published in 1966. 30 years later, he published another book, Working of Democracy in India, and he sought to find out in these 30 years, 3 decades, what really happened with the constitutional framers, say, vision and the practice. So Granville Aston found the Constitution of India as, I quote, the first and foremost a social document with three broad objectives: ensuring unity, democracy, and creating a social revolution, unquote. And here, in fact, he says that the majority of India's constitutional provisions are either directly arrived at furthering the aim of social revolution or attempt to foster this revolution by establishing conditions necessary for its achievement, unquote. So this is what he very pertinently talks about. The Constitution of India is, in his opinion, is more a social revolution document rather than, in fact, a political kind of an arrangement. But what we clearly know is at the dawn of the independence, the liberal traditions which have been underpinning under the Constitution, which are there within the Constitution and all, and even democratic foundations are completely absent in India. So in an ecology or an environment where liberal democracy, freedom to all has not been much pronounced, were not there, in fact, no, in the scenario of India, where the religious, groups and the leaders, basically, they have been, in fact, clamoring for the residual powers which are to be left by the British. So, aspects of democracy, liberal democracy, particularly say, and in fact, no, uh, considerations of social democracy are very, very bleak. But then the question is, how did the framers of the constitution deal with this challenge, and how they have, in fact, no, managed to bring in this social democracy, which is there enshrined in the constitution. So, uh, this is the question, in fact, no, that we would like to look into in this particular talk. So, friends, uh, I'd like to request the host to mute the other participants, please. Yeah, thank you. So, coming back to the same question, like in a sense, in a competing, conflicting kind of claims for, say, political ascendancy uh, at the time of, in fact, no, like the British leaving India, how come there was a sane argument for democracy, which is not just political, but a social and economic? This particular dimension, in fact, now has been the kind of a victory of Dr. Ambedkar. Other than Dr. Ambedkar, we do not see anyone or any political leader or any political scientist for that matter defining democracy in the three kinds of factorial perspectives. Many understand democracy as a political kind of an arrangement, but Ambedkar pertinently has defined democracy in the Indian context not just as a political kind of facet, but more importantly, the social and economic facets as very, very important. And we know pretty well, he said, social and economic democracy are the tissue and fiber of political democracy, without which any political democracy cannot survive. So that has been his basic understanding and his point of say departure from the rest of the political leaders over there at that time. So we also pretty well know that he was very vocal uh, in talking about the freedom struggle that has been taking place under the aegis of the Congress and other kind of a fringe kind of efforts, where Dr. Ambedkar very clearly said all these people, they are fighting for only political freedom, and for me, he said, I am more interested in a political freedom along with social freedom. There he said a political freedom will give liberty or freedom only to the boundaries of a country, but whereas a social freedom, it gives equal citizenry to every individual within the boundaries of that particular country. So Ambedkar said that I am very particular interested in social democracy. So for having these kinds of things in mind, how Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, could try to bring in such kind of a perspective in the Constituent Assembly. So we will see like Ambedkar entering the Constituent Assembly itself is, in fact, kind of a very, very, there was a remote possibility. But let us look into this and we'll see what exactly Ambedkar has managed to do. As Madhav Khosla observes, he says that there are three important dimensions of a revolution that Ambedkar could bring in. So let us see them first and then look into as to how they could be managed to be brought into the enshrining them in the Constitution of India. He says, first, the Constitution codified the rights of the citizens in a great detail. It was conceptualized as a pedagogical tool, aspiring to nothing short of building a new civic culture, unquote. So therefore, Madhav Khosla says the Constitution of India is trying to build or making a foundation, strong foundation to build a new civic culture. This particular thing is very, very important, bringing a new culture in a society where this culture, in fact, now which is being heralded, this culture is being designed to be suitable to the social, cultural, economic democracy that they were trying to bring in, the vision that they had. So, constitution has been conceptualized as a tool to building a new civic culture. This was the first step, nothing less than a revolution. And the second step, in fact, now is on the more of an implementation side. It is to promote the emancipation of the new Indian citizen. So here, the intention actually, as we can see, is elevating a member of the caste, those teeming millions of the people who have been living as members of the caste, elevating each one of them to the equal citizens of a country, equal citizens of a nation. So that has been, in fact, now more operational part of the constitution. So for which the state had to be very strong. Therefore, the Constitution of India, in spite of having its federal character, it has centralized power. Ambedkar was very, very clear on that actually. Why? Because uh, Ambedkar shared an understanding that power has to go beyond the formal legal conceptions and should entail a deeper sociology. So this is another important landmark understanding of Dr. Ambedkar, which makes him unique from all other kind of say participants who are there in the exercise of constitution making. And the third dimension of the constitutional project, friends, is that took place in India's independence, and also it pertained to the representation, right to representation. This is another important aspect of making an Indian nation. That is to unchain imposed group identities and liberate the individual from those kind of imposed kind of a group identities. So for which representation, in fact, the concept of representation has been brought in, and individual has been identified as the unit of development. Hitherto, what we see is India's individuals, in fact, no, they belong to different castes. Individual has no respect at all. No matter what individuals has a prominence and all, he or she shall be looked upon as the member of a particular caste group. And her, social status, her, in fact, no, like, respectability, it dependent on to which social group that she belongs. But the constitution, in fact, no, very, very significantly wanted to make individual as the unit of development. That has been, in fact, now another part of revolution. So these are the three facets of revolution that we can see with the Constitution of India. And Ambedkar's philosophy of constitutionalism revolved around the social justice and change through perfectly constitutional means. This is a kind of a revolution, but Ambedkar wanted to herald a revolution without bloodshed, and that is the reason why his definition of democracy itself, in fact, now reflects this kind of a say kind of a position. And we pretty well knew. I think so. We talked about this his definition of democracy, and he said democracy is a form and method whereby revolutionary changes in the social and economic life of the people are brought in without bloodshed. This has been the very, very pertinent, in fact, now understanding of Dr. Ambedkar. So therefore, friends, he dreamt of India where there would be no discrimination between man and man, between man and woman, uh, no exploitation, and no untouchability, and no basis for any degradation. So that has been his vision, in fact, now for a nation building. And his initial strategy, as long as British were there, British were there, lay in demanding constitutional rights and safeguards, including separate electorate to the depressed classes on the communal lines. But with the advent of independence, friends, Ambedkar approached the problem from a wider perspective of nationalism, democracy, humanity, and justice. So this has been, in fact, now his paradigm shift. Before independence, Ambedkar's efforts were to see human rights for those who are languishing as subhuman. But post-independence, Ambedkar took the responsibility, in fact, now of driving a nation, driving the whole nation from those curtailments of caste, creed, religion, region, and all other kinds of gender, all these kinds of what do you call conscriptions, to free a democratic world. And for that, he wanted the reorganization, rather reconstruction of a society. That has been his premise. So now we'll see what were Ambedkar's efforts before the constitution. As we know, Ambedkar's effort to create a democratic society did not start with the Constituent Assembly, his membership in the Constituent Assembly. He had been, in fact, now striving very hard even before that. Rather, I would say uh, his public life, in fact, now started much before. But even from 1927, Ambedkar was talking about these issues, and he was talking about many other things and all. In 1945, in a lecture that he gave to All India Scheduled Castes Federation on the topic called as the communal deadlock and the way out of it, actually. He was giving, in fact, the background of chances of India for having a constitution itself, not just in 1946-47, but he was saying that India had a chance even under the colonial kind of a rule. So he says, I quote, India has not so far succeeded in evolving order out of her confusion. That's what he says. It is not that she had no opportunities to do so. In fact, there have been quite a number. The first opportunity came in 1927 when Lord Birkenhead gave a challenge to Indians, asking them to produce a constitution for India. Probably not many people, in fact, are aware that even under the kind of a colonial rule, the British, in fact, now tried to make Indians to draft their own style of governance. So that came in 1927, and that challenge was taken up by the Congress Party, and a committee was framed to frame the constitution. And that constitution it has produced was called as a Nehru Constitution. That was not Jawaharlal Nehru, but Motilal Nehru Constitution. Of course, Ambedkar says it was, however, not accepted by the Indians and was buried without remorse. And on that particular constitution, which is known as Nehru Constitution of 1927, Ambedkar criticizes it and says, I quote, it is our firm conviction that the Nehru Committee's Brahminical strategy aims at perpetuating the Hindu social hierarchy in their struggle for political power. What else could be the reason for it extending certain facility to Muslims and deny similar facility to the backward and untouchable classes of the Hindus? Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar says in 1927 that Nehru Constitution, it has came out, in fact, no, not talking anything about kind of a social reorganization of the society. It was favoring to keep things as they were, and then trying to have a political governance. So that is what Dr. Ambedkar was saying. They really wanted to, he says that it's a Brahminical strategy where that particular constitution, the draft constitution of Nehru, Motilal Nehru, was to keep the social hierarchy as it is and then get only the political power. So, which Ambedkar says they have been, in fact, now keeping the majority of the population, the backward and untouchable classes, depressed classes, out of that realm of governance. So that was what Ambedkar was talking about. Then in 1928, friends, Ambedkar was a member of a committee called as START Committee, STRT, START Committee of the Bombay province, where that committee, in fact, was made to inquire into the educational, economic, and social conditions of backward classes, depressed classes, and aboriginal tribes. That was a kind of today's what we call as SC, BC of the present constitution, socially and educationally backward classes, which Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, brought in that kind of a social engineering in the Constitution of India as the schedule of caste, schedule of tribes, and other backward classes, OBCs. He was in that particular exercise, not just in 1946 or 47, he was into that exercise in 1928 as a member of the prominent member of the START committee, wherein that committee, in fact, now gave its report the very next year, recommending, in fact, now all the educational facilities, including hostels and scholarships, and the need to recruitment of these vast majority in different positions of the local governance. So then, of course, after the 1927 Nehru Constitution, a second opportunity came up to Indians in 1930 when they assembled in the round table conference, and there again, Ambedkar says Indians failed to play their part and write out their own constitution. A third attempt is made by the Sapru committee in 1945 for another kind of a draft of constitution. Actually, those proposals, in fact, now have fallen flat. The failures of the past, Ambedkar says, need not daunt anybody. They do not daunt me particularly. That's what he says. And that is the reason why, friends, during 1944 and 1945, when India was, like, in a sense, the Second World War is going on, Ambedkar has toured around many parts of this country, including, say, Madras Presidency. He came to Andhra, coastal Andhra, and he also went to Telangana. 1944 September, the whole month he was touring around, and he was talking about the necessity of drafting a constitution, especially in a talk which he gave in Rajahmundry when he was given the civic response by the Rajahmundry, the then municipality. Ambedkar said, he was saying, it is essential that we bury our differences and then come together and draft a constitution, sign on that, and in fact, no, we take a resolve on that. He was talking about in 1944 September, in Rajahmundry, and even 1945, even in Mumbai, several talks he was giving on lecturing about the necessity of a constitution. And in doing so, friends, Dr. Ambedkar was making use of, in fact, now some sort of an anthropological knowledge in seeking for representation based on the census of India. Not many in India, I don't remember, like, in a sense, not many using the census, the anthropological, in fact, no, based on the census for bringing up a democratic society in this country. We know pretty well, my dear friends, that the census of India has been brought in by the British government in 1871. They wanted to count Indians actually under their control, under their rule. They want to count Indians, and from 1871, after 10 years, they're all decennial census. The decennial census in 1881, and then, of course, 1891, 1901, all the four census, they have counted Indians based on their religion. The basis was population by religion. It was Jyotirao Phule who made use of that particular census of 1881. He used that census in presenting a representation before Hunter Commission in 1882 in demanding based kind of a rightful representations to all people, and his was called as a concept of reservation as representation, which of course, in fact, has formed the basis for Dr. Ambedkar as well in the later periods. So in 1901, I'm sorry, what was the experience was, British government was giving some sort of a representations by nomination to some Muslims based on their population, to Hindus based on their population, to Sikhs based on their population, and in the name of Hindus, in fact, almost all the representation were cornered by the Brahmins. So that having been that being the consequence, in 1906, many of the then scheduled caste leaders, of course, they were called as depressed class, even they were called as untouchables, ex-untouchables. Now we can say, like Kisan Fagoji, Walangekar, and many others. In fact, they made the then Viceroy, Lord, Minto. They met Lord Minto and said, population by religion, in fact, now gives only the population as Hindus, and everything has been knocked down by one section of the society, and we are not being considered. And they said, we are not counted as Hindus. We are treated as avarnas. Actually, we are outside the varna scale. So when they impressed upon Lord Minto, he promised them in the first administrative reforms in 1909, which later went again 10 years, 1919. The Minto-Marley reforms, in fact, have been assessed in Montague-Chelmsford reforms, 1919. And then again in 10 years, the Simon Commission came in 1928-29. And they have seen that particular thing. So they have taken a decision in 1909 Minto-Marley reforms saying that the next census of India shall not take place based on the criteria of population by religion, but it should take place by the criteria called as population by way of life. So then an anthropologist administrator called as E.A.H. Blunt, he was appointed as the commissioner of census in 1911, and he prepared a schedule to understand, in fact, now the way of life of the people. And anybody is interested, probably they can look into that particular thing. And based on that particular schedule, the next census very clearly shown people, grouped people based on the way of life. That group, in fact, now is called as caste Hindus. The second were called as animists, those who follow animistic religion. And the third group are called as depressed classes. So when the way of life has been very clearly shown in the census itself, the 1911 census, in fact, no, the details have been picked up by Dr. Ambedkar in 1916, and he used them in preparing a memorandum for the first ever, like in the sense, Southborough Committee, saying that the depressed classes, in fact, no, and the animists, they have a different way of life, and therefore they should be given different representation. So that was the basis actually. So such kind of, even 1931 census, but the Hutton Commission, actually the Hutton census, Ambedkar made use of those details, and in fact no, he was bringing them to his social political revolution in India actually. So therefore friends, this being the kind of a situation, Ambedkar demanded safeguards to ensure, I quote, the right to adequate representation in the legislature. That has been his thorough kind of an understanding right from 1919. He made several representations based on that to Southborough Committee. Then he went to Simon Commission. Then, in fact, no, in between he went to Muddyman Committee. Then he went to, like in the sense, several commissions that came into India Cripps formulations. He was talking about in representations basically. The first and second, all the roundtable conferences, he was premising on that particular adequate representation based on the pro rata of the population, which has been a democratic kind of a right. Speaking on the subject of joint versus separate electorates, Ambedkar said, I quote, "We, the depressed classes, demand a complete, in fact, now, like in a sense, recognition away from the Hindus. We have been called Hindus for the political purposes, but we have never been acknowledged socially by the Hindus as their brethren." That was his complaint, unquote. So that has been the premise, as we have seen. That was post-independence kind of a position of Dr. Ambedkar. But with the advent of independence, Ambedkar, in fact, now took the responsibility of the broader nation. And then he went on for those kinds of premises. But friends, as we know, Ambedkar is the most unlikely candidate to enter into a constituent assembly, given the situation and given the complete, in fact, no dominance of Congress party and other forces, where Ambedkar probably does not count. But Ambedkar's legal acumen actually, and his caliber and his in fact no force of argument could not, in fact no make him say sidelined actually. So the question is, in fact no, it is pertinent as to why Ambedkar was made the chairman of the drafting committee when there were many other people, like in the sense, who were also what do you call, lawyers over there. But why he was preferred? The reason why he was preferred, of course, there are many arguments like that, but the reason, in fact, is that Ambedkar had only had the experience of drafting a constitution. We know very particularly from 1933 to 1935, Ambedkar was the member of the Lothian Committee, which is also called as Indian Franchise Committee, that has drafted the Government of India Act 1935, from where almost, in fact, no, like in a sense, 3/4 of the Constitution of India now, in fact, no, has been brought in, because the foundations have been laid down very, very precisely by Dr. Ambedkar. So other things apart, but for Ambedkar himself, say, he himself is not very convinced that there is a necessity for a constituent assembly. This is very, very, surprising. So he himself said, I quote, "Should there be a constituent assembly charged with the function of making a constitution? I must state that I am wholly opposed to the proposals of a constituent assembly. It is absolutely superfluous. I regard it as a most dangerous project which may involve in this country in a civil war," unquote. So see, Dr. Ambedkar is saying, if a constituent assembly has been formed and many ideas, in fact, when they get clashed, he says the ideas which he is talking about, in fact, no, they will be clashed and there would be a prospect of a civil war, he says. So, and he also says that I don't see why a constituent assembly is at all necessary. Indians are not in the same position as the fathers of American Constitution, where they framed the Constitution for United States. They had to evolve ideas suitable for the Constitution for a free people. But Ambedkar says that there was no such necessity for India. This cannot, however, be the case for the Indians, because the constitutional ideas and constitutional forms are ready at hand. And that's why he says that the so much of the Constitution of India has already been written out in the Government of India Act 1935, that it seems to be an act of supererogation to appoint a constituent assembly to do the thing ever again. And what all he was saying, in fact, no, is to remove those parts which were objectionable for a free country, and then keep many things, in fact, which are relevant for India as it is, rather than going for an elaborate constituent assembly. But we know pretty well, friends, constituent assembly itself has been constituted with more than 292 members. And that time we know pretty well it is not the Congress government, it was a national government with many people with diverse, in fact, no, ideologies, diverse ideas of India are part, actually were part, like in the sense, you have say Shama Prakash Mukherjee, who was, in fact, no, later became the president of the Janasangh. There were many people like Madan Mohan Malaviya, Tej Bahadur Sapru, Munje, many other people, like in a sense. You also have say some members of the Communist Party, in fact, no, involving certain things. There were socialists, for which Ambedkar, in fact, no, has a tilt. There were people, in fact, no, orthodox and like say rightists, and moderates like Nehru. So Ambedkar had to deal with many of these diverse forces. But yes, the fact was, in fact, no, he was given the signal honor to be the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution. It was a tribute to his competence, intellectual acumen, and deep insight into the constitutional issues. So, friends, the Constitution of India, as we can see from the Constituent Assembly debates, right from the point one, Ambedkar had been, in fact, introducing many of the say uh, resolutions, and he was introducing many of the clauses, articles, and he was the one for almost 2 years, 11 months, and 17 days. Ambedkar has labored single-handedly, actually, which later on was recognized as by T.T. Krishnamacharya. Actually, we will go to it, actually. So he had to answer more than 3,000 queries made by the constituent members. So, but at the objective resolution constituent assembly, where say in 1946, that constituent assembly was called as objective resolutions constituent assembly, where they sat down to decide what should be the objective of the constitution. And apart from others, Ambedkar was very, very clear. There he said, this cannot be a political document alone. The objective of the constitution must be to tackle the social service, formulation of society as well. That is the reason why he said, he said, the framework for the future constitution has to underline the need to build up a cohesive society. When he said, I quote, "Our difficulty is how to make the heterogeneous mass that we have today take a decision in common and march on the way which leads us to unity. Our difficulty is not with regard to the ultimate. Our difficulty is with regard to the beginning, unquote. So this is, in fact, no, was Ambedkar's main struggle. He wants to create, in fact, establish an inclusive society, and for which he looks at democracy not as a political arrangement, but as a mode of associated living. This is what we have seen when Ambedkar said the roots of democracy are to be searched in the social relationship in terms of associated life between people who form the society. So therefore, he highlights fraternity as the root of democracy, which of course is very, very vital and important even today. So therefore, friends, uh, how he wants to, in fact, make members of the caste into equal citizens. What important and very, very critical areas Ambedkar has touched upon as a constitutional, kind of an expert. So, Professor Upendra Bakshi, say, deals with this aspect, and he makes a very elaborate, say, analysis as to how Ambedkar was unique in, bringing in these things and all. So let us see a few aspects of uniqueness of Ambedkar as the lawmaker. So for the first time, friends, Ambedkar raises in the Indian jurisprudence the problem of lawless laws. So this is what, in fact, this particular lawless laws, this say phrase I have borrowed from Michel Foucault when he was talking about, like, in a sense, how the cultural legitimacy to the legal illegitimacy took place in many of the societies. So therefore, the classical Manusmriti celebrates the illegality of the rights, and Ambedkar interrogates the organized millennial lawlessness structured through this so-called sacred law. It is a daring enterprise and simply unmatched even in the contemporary times. It was very difficult. Ambedkar, in fact, as a daredevil, he, in fact, rushed into many of these things and exposed the lawlessness of those. So given the horrible context of destitution, deprivation, and disadvantage systematically haunting the backward classes, the majority backward classes, which he frames in the constitution as socially and educationally backward classes, Ambedkar innovates thinking about justice, freedom, and rights in a very remarkable way. He has departed fundamentally from the liberal paradigm of rights and justice, and Ambedkar sought to accomplish that these in a very, very unusual kind of a result. So I would like to point out three important aspects, because this constitution making is a vast, kind of an area, and for a talk like this, in fact, no, we should be very, very precise. So I have taken few kind of things. Ambedkar's theory of rights was addressed more to civil society than to the government or to the state. This is a very important thing. Rights do not appear as constraints and limits on the power of the state. See, he is not curtailing the government. Why? Rights emerge as legal entitlements, casting corresponding obligations on the members of the civil society. Rights atypically, in Ambedkar's thought, are legitimate interventionist, wanted a legitimate interventionist state. He wanted the government to interfere into the lives of the people with regard to protecting their basic of human rights, actually. Why? Because there is a culture which doesn't recognize the basic human rights of the majority of the people. So that is one thing. His theory of rights, it addressed more to the civil society than the government, the state, which has been the case with other constitutions. And Ambedkar's essential juristic strategy was to innovate jural relations. What? The backward classes they had a right, the people had a right, and the state a duty to eradicate the discriminatory practice in the civil society. He makes the government responsible to remove the discriminatory practice in the society. This is very unusual, friends, which you will not find in any constitution in the world at all, then and even now. This we will talk about this later, how he has brought in here, in which article he has brought in that particular thing. Then what he said, the state had the power and the members of the society were under liability to have their cultural practices redefined to match the democratic kind of a society, requirements of society. He was trying to, in fact, debase an unequal society, the culture of an unequal society, and establish a culture of a democratic, say, foundations through the constitutional means. It's a great feat of jurisprudence, actually. So, by that, the majority communities, the kind of a religious community, their rights to cultural and religious freedom stand fully curtailed normatively by the enunciation of the right of social equality of all citizens of this country. So there he was trying to curtail the rights of the majority with regard to cultural and religious freedom, and he was in fact now making those curtailments suitable for bringing on a democratic culture. So this is a great feat, right, friends? And then Ambedkar precisely pointed to the problem of rights and basic needs. This is another issue which we need to understand. He makes saying that the basic rights, the basic needs of the OBC, scheduled castes, and even scheduled tribes, basically, they were both material and non-material. Material we can understand because they are basic human necessities, like say immunity from aggression, and then access to public facilities, access to resources such as drinking water, participation in government employment. All these basically we see as material kind of say needs. But what are the non-material needs? The non-material needs, in fact, now are a variety of needs concerning with dignity and fraternity and getting a respect of equal human being. These are very, very important, Ambedkar says. Apart from the material needs, which in fact now talk about the basic human necessities, but the psychological needs or even non-material needs, they in fact now pertain to the equal status and getting in fact now getting that for the recognition of equal human being from that of subhuman being. Those things are also very, very important, and Ambedkar in fact now very pertinently has understood this duality of these kind of needs and then provided the rights. So animating this last identification, Russell's a very distinctive theory of representation, which has not been there actually. The bare catalog of needs thus identified to sustain a campaign to transform the needs into rights is an astonishing facet of Ambedkar's revolutionary achievement through constitution. So friends, let us see what are those kinds of affirmative and transformative measures that Ambedkar has kept for social and economic democracy to be brought into the constitution. Friends, in fact, now the roadmap actually is laid for democratic society is one is about with regard to representations. Ambedkar makes a distinction way back in 1919 through the say Southborough Committee, where he says that he was against the culture of reservations and he was in favor of culture of representation. Where Dr. Ambedkar says the culture of reservations belong to a Brahminical society where only one section of the people, in fact, they reserved education for 100% for thousands of years, reserved rule 100% for one single community. One single community reserved the control over resources for our centuries, and the majority of the people are reserved certain occupations for our centuries. Ambedkar calls this as a Brahminical culture of reservations, and he says that I am for the culture of representations. So that is where he says that representation basically is in fact no democratic right, where those people who make a democracy basing on their pro rata of the population, percentage of population, every section must get represented in every walk of life. So that's the reason why when he in fact now brought in the Article 15 and Article 16 as in fact now representations in the field of education and representations in the field of employment to the socially and educationally backward classes, they were, he calls them as representation, not reservation. He said reservations, in fact, no, is a word used by the colonial government, where in the whole of the world, wherever they have displaced the natives and gave some shops to them, they call them as reservations. So therefore, that is one thing that he has brought, and it is underlined to be underlined that the idea basically of representation is to break the monopoly by proportional representation, and the policy is to bring scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBC on one platform in order to break the caste system, as the representations are given not for single caste but collection of castes. This as backward classes. This we need to understand. Of course, many people could not understand even today, and those people who enjoy those kind of rights of representations also have failed to understand this as collective rights basically. So the next aspect, in fact, no, friends, these are some of the affirmative rights that we see in the fundamental right. But those rights Dr. Ambedkar gave in them was directive principles of state policy. They basically where we see the transformative rights. And I do not want to take much of your time, but I just want to talk about two important articles in the Constitution as to how they are important for social and economic democracy in this country. One is Article 38, and Article 39. I would request friends to refer to them, and then you will see Article 38 says, I quote, "The state shall strive to promote the welfare of the people by securing and protecting as effectively as it may. The state shall strive by doing what? By securing and promoting what? A social order in which justice, economic, social, and political shall inform all the institutions of national life." Unquote. If you reread this particular thing, my dear friends, this particular article says that the state here means government. It is the government's duty to strive and promote what? A social system, a social order, whereby social, economic, political justice is informed to all citizens of this country. This has been a revolutionary kind of a article. Here, Dr. Ambedkar is saying very openly that the governments have an onerous responsibility to establish and promote a social order which is democratic social order by destroying this unequal Brahminical social order, Brahminical Varna caste system. It is a powerful kind of say article, but unfortunately, in fact, no government was ready to do that, and nor the citizens of this country, in fact, were not aware of this particular. And if you look into Article 39, Article 39 says the state shall strive to see that there is no concentration of wealth in few hands. The state must see, the government must see that there is no concentration of wealth in few hands. Article 39 clause B says that the state shall strive to see that there is equitable distribution of resource among all the citizens. So Article 38, when he was talking about establishing a democratic social order by the government, it is in fact now he's talking about social democracy. And when he's talking about Article 39 as equitable distribution of resources, he was very particularly talking about economic democracy. These two are there in the directive principles. And of course, he has to struggle a lot. We'll come back to that, how he has to struggle with many in the Constituent Assembly to be placed these things in the directive principles, not in the fundamental rights. Why? Because, like, in a sense, he said, I had to keep them, in fact, in the directive principles. And when somebody asked what was the use, Dr. Ambedkar said, I quote, "You will realize the importance of directive principles when the forces of right assume power." Unquote. That's what he said in 1947 itself. When the forces of the communal governments, in fact, when they take, say, the forces of the reins of power, Ambedkar said, you will understand the importance of these directive principles. Unfortunately, neither the people nor the citizens nor, in fact, the governments have realized that. So Ambedkar announced that at that time that the people of India, I quote, "except to happen in a sovereign and free India is a complete destruction of Brahminism as a philosophy of life and as a social order, there is no future for them." He says that except for destruction of this unequal social order that is in fact now promoted by the philosophy of Brahminism, ideology of Brahminism, Ambedkar says that a democratic life cannot be established, and that is the caveat that he is putting into. So, friends, as we say, it is not that easy for Ambedkar, in fact, no, to wriggle in the constitution. He, like in a sense, not just the colonialism, Ambedkar had to fight with internal colonization actually in the Constituent Assembly. They show, if anybody goes into the huge volumes of the Constituent Assembly for almost 3 years, they will find out the labor that Ambedkar had to go through in bringing, in fact, at least this sort of a change. And yeah, he had to fight with many. There were several different people with different ideologies in the Constituent Assembly. The very first initial demand was in the Constituent Assembly was to make Sanskrit as a national language. The second was demand for bringing in ban on cow slaughter, and there are many things like that actually. And he has, like in a sense, in fact, no, even to name India. That is the reason when, like in a sense, with the confabulations over there was a compromise. Compromise category is designated the country as India, that is Bharat. It has to be written in the preamble like that. So there were several different elements there, and other thing is, like in a sense, we know pretty well in the Constituent Assembly, although there were many members, it was again Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel. They were the main figures in decision making level, because Ambedkar knew pretty well that the Constituent Assembly was in fact no a one party majority, and many things in fact no have to be, like in a sense, wriggled through. But I would like to talk to you about many things that hurdles that came up. But I'll give you one simple, say example. That is with regard to right to education. Dr. Ambedkar has in the draft constitution kept right to education as a fundamental right, as Article 23 in the draft constitution. And there were a majority of people, in fact, who opposed that. And the constitution drafting committee subcommittee was formed under the headship of Vallabhbhai Patel. So when Ambedkar drafted Article 23, saying that every single child up to the age of 14 years have to be given free and compulsory education, and fundamental right, in fact, no, right to education is a fundamental right. This constitutional subcommittee headed by Patel, they opposed these two proposals. They said we cannot have a fundamental right, because they were saying that the future governments, there may be challenges of resources. See, like they were talking about the curtailment of resources for educating the people, skilling the people then and there itself. These arguments are not recent. They were there. The objections were there itself. And the second objection, they said, not up to 14 years. They said we can allow only up till 11 years. Then Ambedkar had to fight for 2 days, friends, with this recommendation of the Constitutional Subcommittee, saying that it is 11 to 14 years. These are the crucial times for, in fact, no, the teeming millions of Indians who are living in the villages. This is the time where they either end up in the farms or factories. And this is the time, in fact, no, we need to keep. And he was fighting valiantly. And in fight, in fact, no, he had to leave. He had to, in fact, no, leave the fundamental right status, and has to stick on to this particular up to 14 years free and compulsory education. And Ambedkar could manage that in the directive principles, where it came in directive principles article 45. Article 45, if you see that, Ambedkar has argued much, saying that education is very important up to 14 years. Government, in fact, had to take responsibility. And Article 45, my dear friends, is the only article in the whole of the Constitution that there is a time frame was kept. He was very, very valiant in saying that. He said this Article 45, he very, very importantly penned, saying that within 10 years of the promulgation of the Constitution, every child up to the age of 14 years shall get free and compulsory education within 10 years. That means by 1960, there must have been, in fact, no complete education for all the children up to the age of 14. But successive educational policies, they started, in fact, now postponing this, starting from Kothari Commission 1963, postponing this, in fact, now compulsory free education. Now in 2012, when you got the right to education, and the onus was given to the parents, not to the government. That is the thing. And several other things, in fact, no. When a person called as a Nagappa, member of the Constituent Assembly, he put a proposal, in fact, now for a kind of a joint electorate for the benefit of the depressed classes. Patel has very curtly said, Nagappa, in fact, no, is trying to make a impression that he was representing his people. And he Patel said, I quote, "You need to forget what Dr. Ambedkar and his group have done." And he said, Patel says, "I feel that the vast majority of Hindu population wish you well." That is for the scheduled caste. "Without them, where will you be? Therefore, secure their confidence and forget that you are a scheduled caste." Unquote. This is what Patel was saying. This is, in fact, now sometimes kind of a stream rolling, actually. Nagappa had to withdraw his amendment, which has been signed even by 4 representatives, including Ambedkar. So, friends, there are many things, like many hurdles. He has to cross many hills, many of the valleys, and all, to make this happen. And Ambedkar said, in fact, no, speaking in the Constituent Assembly, Ambedkar stated his position in a profoundly lucid and a cogent manner. And he said, I quote, "Unfortunately, Indian people are by tradition men who have more faith on few people rather than their own wit," saying that you don't use your conscience, but you simply want to follow certain people. So, yes, friends, is the favoring of social political democracy, in fact, now, with combined with social equity and political equity, has been the very important some aspects in the Trinity. So, to a large extent, friends, Ambedkar, in fact, now had to go for a operate on a basis of compromise and consensus for many things, and he has done many things, in fact, against his conscience. But still, there are some people even today talking about Ambedkar's contribution to the Constituent Assembly, or Ambedkar's contribution to the drafting of the Constitution. For which, in fact, now I would like to mention one thing. What T.T. Krishnamachari, as a member of one of the member of the Constituent Assembly, said when the draft Constitution has been, in fact, now presented to the President. He said, I quote, "The House is perhaps aware that of the 7 members nominated by you," he was saying the President of India, "one has resigned from the House and was not replaced. One died and was not replaced. One was away in America and his place was not filled up. And another person was engaged in the state affairs and there was void to that extent. 1 or 2 people were far away from Delhi and perhaps for reasons of health did not attend many of the Constituent Assembly meetings. So it happened ultimately that the burden of drafting the Constitution fell on Ambedkar, and I have no doubt that we are grateful to him for having achieved this task in a manner which is undoubtedly commendable." Unquote. This is what, in fact, no T.T. Krishnamachari, a fellow member of Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly, said about Ambedkar. So there are many people, like, in a sense, to now we talk about. But friends, I would rather say that the Constitution that we have today, yes, it's a democratic Constitution, but it also, in fact, now can be termed by Ambedkar as a crypto-capitalist Constitution for a socialist Ambedkar, because his original Constitution was states and minorities, where he talked about the socialist ideals of nationalization of land and industry, and land, in fact, now should be farmed through collective farming. They are very important socialist principles that Ambedkar, in fact, said. I would rather say that if Ambedkar had his way in decision making, he would have joined the hands with democratic socialists like K.T. Shah, Damodar Swarup, Arunachandra Guha, etc., and would have included some of the articles from directive principles in fundamental rights, and made our Constitution really socialistic, because he was at the bottom of the heart a true socialist, which he talked about very clearly. In 1953, Ambedkar himself said, I quote, "I drafted the Constitution on the request of the majority party. I was compelled to incorporate provisions which I dislike most." Unquote. Later on, he was also saying the youth must go on fighting and they must change the Constitution for a much refined way to be suitable for the present times. That's what Ambedkar said. But yes, friends, but barring from that particular kind of a deficit which he wanted actually, but what he has achieved was a remarkable way in charting a course for a democratic society to form. So later on, in fact, no Hindu Code Bill, of course, uh, he worked very relentlessly for a Hindu Code Bill to bring down not just to get rights for the women, but for the demolition of the caste system itself. If anybody reads the Hindu Code Bill, they will get this particular thing. But yeah, when he was disappointed, Ambedkar said, I quote, uh, we built a temple for a god to come in and reside. But before the god could come, the god could be installed. If the devil has taken the position of it, what else could we do except to destroy the temple? This is what even, in fact, he was saying with despair. So, friends, in conclusion, what I could say is that Ambedkar did the right thing, very right thing, by emphasizing that the objective of the constitution was to establish an egalitarian society where rights were guaranteed not to a few but to all citizens. Primacy was therefore accorded in the constitution to the rights of the socially and educationally backward class masses, of the minorities, of the underprivileged classes, as against the political and civil rights of few individuals, entrenched interests, and propertied classes. The whole scheme was based on the philosophy postulating a dialogue between individualism and state control. That has been the thing, in fact, now. But Ambedkar has warned about the pitfalls. And I quote, friends, Ambedkar said, today, India is governed by two ideologies. The ideology enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution promises a life of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But the ideology that the people follow every day, which is Brahminical ideology, denies such life. Unquote. That's what he said. And he also said, one finds that the laws are on the side of equality, but the customs and traditions that people follow are on the side of inequality. So therefore, he said, in fact, no, that the people of this country, the true informed citizens, should navigate between this particular income consistency. He also recognized that the lofty ideals expressed in the constitution would remain as they were, given the nature of the contradiction between inherent in the society. He stated, I quote, we must begin by acknowledging the fact that there is complete absence of two things in Indian society. One of these is equality. On the social plane, we have in India a society based on the principles of graded inequality, which means elevation for some and degradation for others. On the economic plane, we have a society in which there are some who have immense wealth as against many who live in abject poverty. This has been the situation much graver even today, my dear friends, contemporary. So therefore, my dear friends, if the universalistic dimension of Indian constitution is being challenged today by the Hindu nationalism, as Ambedkar forewarned before, its reformistic and emancipatory power is also under attack for the reasons one could detect at the same time. The constitution debates itself actually were formed. Ambedkar had to fight with these forces while drafting the constitution. And even after 70 years of the drafting of the constitution, friends, the Democrats of this country have been seeing that the same forces, in fact, now have been trying to derail the establishment of a democratic society. So, democratic constitution, in fact, today, my dear friends, has become a very convenient arrangement for those who believed in what we now call the majoritarianism, actually. So these are the like the negative sides of it as to how operation. That's the reason why Ambedkar said a constitution. In fact, no, there is no such thing as a good constitution or a bad constitution. He said it depends on the people who operate that constitution. Even if the constitution is bad, if the people who operate it are good, they will make that constitution is a good constitution. And he said even if the constitution is very good, but if the people who are called to operate on it, they are not good, they will make this as a bad constitution. So that is the reason why he said democracy doesn't work on its own. The people who make the democracy, they must in fact make it work. So that has been the onerous responsibility, friends. So the Constitution of India, friends, representing the aspirations of the people, it has opened a lot of floodgates, in fact, no, of demands from anthropology, especially to play a leading role in ensuring human development with human dignity. addressing the issues of poverty and development, social and economic discrimination and deprivation, health and disease, food and security, gender equality. They form the agenda of anthropology in collaboration with the natural and social sciences and also with humanities as well. I think so, like in a sense, that has been one of the important aspects of the duty as citizens that we keep, to see that the ideals and the vision of the constitution to create a reconstruction of such a society, to make it into a democratic society. We feel that it's our bounden duty. I thank you very much for your patient listening, and I welcome uh, any of your queries, suggestions, and some criticisms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor P.D.Satyapal Kumar sir, for your valuable presentation on the present topic. So I request if the participants have any questions, queries, please pose your questions to the speaker. In the context of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and the agenda for nation building and the present topic, social reconstruction, constitution as an instrument to reconstruct the society. So in this regard, regarding the presentation, is there any question from the participants? It is very interesting that the directive principles of state policy, particularly the Article 38 and 39, regarding this social democracy and the economic democracy. Are there any articles that support this kind of prescriptions for reconstruction of the society, which are very vital? That is my question, sir.
Yes. And there are many, if in fact, now if you can see, with regard to fundamental rights, say as I want to, like in a sense, although I'm not from the discipline of law, as an anthropologist, in fact, no, I'd like to see the kind of provisions that are there in the constitution to be categorized as affirmative rights or affirmative measures and the transformative measures. Affirmative measures, in fact, no, we see them in the fundamental right. They are affirmation, in fact, no, to as the rights given to the citizens, and the state has a bounden duty to see that those rights are protected and honored. But I see that the transformative measures, in fact, which are there in the constitution, they are the duties of the state to proactively follow them, to see that in fact no, the kind of a society which has been enshrined or envisioned in the constitutional program is materialized. So in that way, representation is very important aspect. Not just representation, which I talk, like in a sense, I talk about which are being called as so-called reservations and all, but we understand Jyotirao Phule and Dr. Ambedkar, both of them, when they talk about representations in culture of representations, they both of them said, in fact, no, basing on the percentage of population, they want, in fact, no representation for all sections of the people in the society in the fields of education, employment, agriculture, industry, bureaucracy, and governance of this country. That has been the holistic kind of a representation that they wanted. But unfortunately, as I've been talking about, Dr. Ambedkar could manage only 2 of these 6 which we talked about. He could manage only, in fact, no, the representation in education and representation in employment. This he could manage. But there are other rights, of course. There, in fact, no, in the Directive Principles in Article 335, where we can see representations in the political kind of a field, which of course are called as political reservations. And not many people, even though so-called educated people, do not realize that there are two kinds of reservations that are there, so-called reservations in the Constitution. The so-called reservations in education and jobs, they are there in the fundamental rights. And many people say that Dr. Ambedkar gave them only for 10 years. That has been a thorough misnomer. Fundamental rights are not, they don't have time frame. Fundamental rights would be there as long as there is inequality, there will be opportunities for equality. So those representative rights basically are opportunities for equal opportunities for all sections of the people to come up. So they don't have a time frame. But Ambedkar has kept a 10 years limit for so-called political reservations for MLAs, MPs, and all those things. In fact, no, he said there should be 10 years frame and they must be assessed or they must be discussed after every 10 years whether they are yielding the right kind of representation or not. But unfortunately, what we see today is many of the representatives from the socially and educationally backward classes, the OBC, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, they have become, in fact, no, the tail members of respective parties, and they are satisfied with whatever stops that they are given to them. And many of them, in fact, no, they fail to deliver their duty and responsibility as representatives of their respective sections of the society which they are supposed to do. So therefore, naturally, like in a sense, after every 10 years there must have been a kind of a revision. But those political parties which are in power, they never, in fact, like go for this kind of a assessment without discussion. After every 10 years, every government, whichever government is that is there in power, they extend these political reservations and do not tend to, in fact, give those kinds of rights which are there as a fundamental rights. They are not very interested to give them, but they are very interested in extending these political representations for every 10 years. The reasons we all know, because they want many of these political representatives as their stooges. So that's the reason why Ambedkar himself has said these are the political stooges coming out of the Pune Pact, and he said they're like those living in rented houses, and they open their mouths only for yawning. He was very categorical. So that's the reason why, like in a sense, as I said, there are many provisions, like in the sense, the Schedule 5 and Schedule 6. See, just for 8% of the population, the scheduled tribes, Dr. Ambedkar has kept in two schedules of the 13 schedules of the whole constitution. Two schedules are, in fact, devoted for just 8% of the population. That was very important. In fact, the kind of a primacy that he gives for the scheduled tribes actually. And if anybody looks into the constant assembly debates, Dr. Ambedkar, at times supported by Jaipal Singh Munda, they were valiantly fighting the majority in the constant assembly, including, in fact, like say A.V. Thapar, he is called as Thakkar Bapa, in getting, in fact, the rights for the scheduled tribes. So we could go on actually with many of these measures, which are devoted for both affirmative measures in the constitution as well as the transformative measures. So, like in a sense, it becomes a kind of a whole, the kind of what you call a kind of a class on constitution. But there are many at any given point. In fact, the interests of these majority of people who are not been represented have been kept, and very carefully, very cautiously, in trying to make, in fact, a democratic society through the constitutional means. That was a great feat that Ambedkar, in fact, envisioned. That was very unique in respect of any of the nation states that formed out of colonization. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Dear participants, is there any question from your side? The Constitution of India as the supreme law of the land, whose aims and objectives have been clearly mentioned in the preamble of the Constitution. And do we find any violations of those vision of the Constitution, the aims and objectives of the Constitution in the present day scenario?
It has been a very pertinent question. See, there are certain sections of the people, as I told you, in the Constituent Assembly itself, there are forces with different ideologies, and not all of them, in fact, no, are truly adhere to this particular constitution, democratic constitution. So, and also, in fact, no, all provisions that are made there in the that are provided in the constitution. So, when you have, in fact, no, such kind of groups assuming power, naturally, like in a sense, they do not give credence to what are there, all there in the preamble, either in the preamble or in the several, in fact, no, statutes of the constitution. Yes, there are certain sections, in fact, no, who have drafted their own constitution in 1997 itself. If anyone, like in the sense, checks in the Google, if you can check in the Google, the search would be like in the sense draft of a new constitution 1997. You will find a draft of new constitution of India with their own preamble, with their own, in fact, no intent, corrections here and there, additions here and there, in consonance with their idea of India. So therefore, when you have, in fact, no certain people who are in the helm of affairs with their own ideologies, they naturally, like in a sense, would like to promote their ideologies, scuttling, in fact, no, the ideologies that are there in the constitution. So such things, in fact, no, have happened, and they have been happening actually all the while. And that is the reason why Ambedkar kept the onus of responsibility on the people who make a democracy. So he also said democracy is for a matured society. And he said that the people of this country, as citizens, must be able to make the democracy work. So unfortunately, such a thing is not happening. And we can see, in fact, no, such kinds of derailment or some kind of, in fact, no, or contrivance, in fact, no, of the certain things which are against the spirit of the constitution took place and taking place as well. So yeah, there are certain things, in fact, now when constitution itself, governance itself has been stopped on its rails, there are certain things, in fact, now like say uh, emergency period in this country, or and even under the normal conditions, many of the provisions of the constitution have been deliberately disregarded. And like in a sense, with authoritarian populism, many of the constitutional guarantees, rights, they just, in fact, now would get scuttled. So yes, it all depends on, in fact, now the the orientation of the people or ideology of the people who are called to work upon the constitution. And yes, if something is going awry, I think so it is the duty of the citizens to see that this democratic constitution works. Uh, Otherwise, no force, like in the sense from outside, would help. Yeah.
The fraternity conception or the objective which is mentioned in the preamble, which is very powerful prescription to lay the solid foundation for the social democracy and social reconstruction in the face of inequality and in the face of human deprivation and in the face of treating fellow humans as subhumans or lower than animals sometimes. So that is the kind of situation where the society needs really light and vision, where all humans are treated with dignity and with honor and with proper due respect. The fraternity has its promise of delivering its abundance to promote to construct the human dignity. So how this fraternity is realized or implemented over the years, and how what the constitutional mandate or constitutional vision for fraternity in Indian societal context. So where are we exactly, and where our nation is heading on this particular constitutional prescription of fraternity of all Indians?
Yeah, that's an important question. And in Ambedkar's say uh, discourse, he says he says fraternity is the cornerstone of democracy. Assessing between fraternity and equality, fraternity and liberty. Ambedkar says fraternity is the cornerstone of democracy actually, and that needs to be, like, in a sense, promoted in a society where there are no platforms of dialogue between two castes or members of any caste and all. They are not encouraged. So yeah, that is very important. And much of the part that you have raised would become, in fact, no, the text for our next say topic. We have a topic called as prospects of democracy in India and constitutional morality. I think so we will cover many of those aspects in the text, in that particular topic. We will keep them there. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear friends, before we close, is there any question from the participants? Constitution as the agenda for the reconstruction of the Indian society. So based on the presentation on this topic,
So if there are no comments or criticisms or suggestions, I would be excused because I need to join another call. Dr. P.D.Satyapal, if at all there are any, like, in a sense, even post this session, our participants are free to write, free to raise them later on.
but before we close, I have one more thing to ask, sir. The Constitution provides the freedom of faith. So when faith prescribes a certain set of attitudes which are towards the fellow humans and towards the fellow themselves itself. So one side, Constitution provides the freedom of faith, freedom of propagating their faith. At the same time, the other side, Constitution prescribes fraternity and equality and dignity for all humans. So when a certain kind of belief system prescribe that some degraded the arrangement of human society, the other side, the society need to be built on the reconstructed on the foundation of equality and fraternity and liberty. So how these two things go together, and what is your observation?
Yeah, it is true that right to religion is there in the preamble of the Constitution. It is, in fact, now has been given as a matter of important right in the Constitution itself. But we know pretty well, like, in the sense, there is a way how to look into the instruments of the constitution. There are certain things called as reasonable restrictions actually, and there is also a way as to how to look into one particular right as in consonance with other rights actually. Yes, there is freedom of religion, but at the same time, if a freedom of religion in fact now uh, makes a kind of a sanction of inequality whereby another citizen in fact now gets affected, then the reasonable restriction comes up over there. See, the the right to religion in fact now is has to be looked up at the personal. Right to religion has to be looked up as the personal kind of a thing, and it cannot give an absolute kind of a freedom for a person to discriminate, freedom for a person to discriminate as in fact other citizens. Yeah.
అదే భయ్యా రిసౌండ్ వస్తుంది అక్షను ఇప్పుడు వస్తుందయ్యా రిసౌండ్
Yeah, the Constitution, the Constitution of India provides the freedom of religion. At the same time, Constitution of India provides the all Indians are equal, and they should treat each other as brothers. And the fraternity is the principle that lays the solid foundation for bright future of the country, particularly to build the nation, to promote the uh, brotherhood, provides the hope for the nation, because from our journey from the past to the present where we are, and the vision of the Constitution, which provides a hope for all Indians to reach the destiny where all Indians enjoy the equality, liberty, and the fraternity, and dignity, and collective well-being and common good. And that's where the judiciary comes into place to articulate, to interpret the fine lines where the executive and the policy bodies need to listen and provide kind of, as Professor Satyapal rightly said, reasonable restrictions. And those are the things I think need more clarity, and also the citizens of India need to get acquainted with these what judiciary has to say in the till now 7 decades of independence, and we have some landmark judgments where the rights of the citizens of the nation, and there are regarding the social democracy and economic democracy, and reconstruction of the society, and to what Constitution has to deliver through the collective efforts of the judiciary, executive, and legislature. And when the citizens, particularly even they're at the personal level, they become active, and they are really the education, which is constitution centric education, particularly the values of the Constitution, and the prescriptions of the Constitution, where the human life for the smooth running of the social order and national progress, those things are promised. So it is a collective responsibility, again, individual responsibility, and nation building is a much needed course, and we are looking forward to learn from Professor Satyapal sir in upcoming topics, and he's bringing a rich knowledge which is essential for the inclusive for the inclusion in every university, and particularly in every anthropology department, because we anthropology, we study humans holistically, and empirically we conduct field works and try to understand the cultural and social and political and the holistic reality of the humanity in our society. So these anthropological insights, and particularly Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's applied anthropological insights, that brings the wisdom for the nation building. That's where we are trying to learn from him and his insights, and so that we can play our part, active part in building our nation and taking our nation forward, so that every citizen of the country can be feel happy and secure and dignified and treated with dignity. So this is we are trying little by little, things are coming up. So we are trying to cast this vision of nation building, and what Ambedkar has to say in this huge process. So what Constitution has to say, and what the individual citizens has to feel responsible. All those things coming together. So yeah, thank you, dear participants, and thank you, Professor P.D.Satyapal Kumar sir, for your wonderful lecture on Constitution as the agenda for reconstructing the society in India. Thank you very much. These few words, we close this session. Thank you all. See you in the next session. Thank you.